Wow, I should leave now. I've got to say, I've had the best 24 hours. I went to the yoga session yesterday evening with Robin. She's in the audience. Namaste, Robin. And I'm here to report good news. An amazing thing happened. For the first time in a long time, my fingertips made a connection with my toes. And I'm still standing. Isn't that great? I'm very pleased about that. You know, listening to all the speakers we've had today, I think there's a lot of connections that we could all draw between each of them. But the one that I'm taking away the most is that all of them, in their own individual and special way, have had to go and take a big risk in order to go and do the thing that they've come here and shared with us today. And as an expedition leader, I've had to take quite a few calculated risks in my life. I've also taken a few uncalculated risks, but I'm not going to talk about them now. And as an expedition leader, taking a risk, I'm finding that as I get older, I'm finding it, well, increasingly hard to take those risks. I'm really having now to force myself to get out of my comfort zone. And I do think that as a society, we are becoming more risk adverse. You know, when I was growing up in Britain, around 80% of children aged 8 and 9 travelled unaccompanied to school. But by the time I'd left school, that number had shrunk to just 9%. Earlier this year, a story broke in the British media about a couple living in London who were allowing their 2 children, aged 5 and 8, to cycle 1 mile from home to school. Now, the parents had picked this route with meticulous care. In fact, they ensured that the children only had to cross 1 main road, and even that was administered by a lollipop lady. Okay, I sense something's got lost in translation between England and the United States. Right, a lollipop lady. A lollipop lady is not an old woman sitting by the side of the road saying, "Hello, little children, would you like a sweetie?" No, in Britain, a lollipop lady looks like this. Now, the headmaster of the school had got in touch with the parents and explained to them that unless they accompanied their children to school on their bicycles, he would have no option but to report them to the local authorities' social services. Now, the parents put up a defence and they said, well, look, we're just trying to allow our children to enjoy their lives and also to teach them a little bit about the risks in life. And this got me thinking, do the parents have a point? Could the local authority, could the law be wrong? And then I remembered that as a 9-year-old, my mother would drop me off progressively further and further away from the school gates. And of course, at the time, I just thought she was as frightened of the head teacher as I was. But she was trying to give me just a little bit of independence. And I do think that the actions that my parents took, despite their terror of letting me off the leash, went a long way to giving me the confidence at the age of 18 to propose and co-lead a 47-strong expedition to Everest Base Camp. Since then, I've learned a lot more about risk on the various expeditions that I've undertaken. But the person who taught me the most about risk, about assessing it, about minimizing it, but ultimately embracing it in order that we can fulfill our potential, was Glenn Shaw. When I met Glenn, he told me his lifetime expedition ambition was to kayak off the coast of Antarctica. And this sounded like a wild idea to me, and we spent a year planning the voyage. Now, in order to minimize some of those risks, we rehearsed some of the drills we knew we'd have to do when we got out to the Southern Ocean. So, for example, we had to work out how to get from the support vessel into the kayak in a heaving swell. And as a result of doing these practices in Britain before we left, we had a wildly successful expedition. Now, you might think that kayaking in Antarctica is a hazardous undertaking, and of course you'd be right. But for Glenn, it was doubly so, because Glenn suffered from a condition known as brittle bones disease. You can see him on the left-hand side of this photograph with 3 members of his support team. The safe thing would have been for Glenn not to have undertaken these adventures. But expeditions were one of Glenn's passions. They made him happy. And I do think that taking a risk in your life, even a small one, can lead to moments of happiness. Now, Glenn wasn't the first person to work this out. In the 1920s, the world's leading mountaineer was George Lee Mallory. He was most famous for his multiple attempts to climb Mount Everest. People were asking him all the time, "Why do you want to climb Mount Everest?" And so one day, Mallory wrote down the reasons why, and I'd like to share them with you now. The first question which you will ask, and which I must try to answer, is this: what is the use of climbing Mount Everest? And my answer must at once be, it is of no use. There is not the slightest prospect of any gain whatsoever. Oh, we may learn a little about the behaviour of the human body at high altitudes, where there is only a third of an atmosphere, and possibly medical men may turn our observation to some account for the purposes of aviation. But otherwise, nothing will come of it. We shall not bring back a single bit of gold or silver, not a gem, nor any coal or iron. We shall not find a foot of earth that can be planted with crops to raise food. It's no use. So if you cannot understand that there is something in man which responds to the challenge of this mountain and goes out to meet it, that the struggle is the struggle of life itself, upward and forever upward, then you won't see why we go. What we get from this adventure is just sheer joy. And joy is, after all, the end of life. We do not live to eat and make money. We eat and make money to be able to enjoy life. That is what life means and what life is for. I think that the expedition that brought me the most joy took place in 1999, when I led an expedition to a range of unclimbed mountains in Central Asia. It's a rare privilege in this day and age to be able to go somewhere where no one has gone before, and to know that every step you take is a step into the unknown. My team climbed 5 mountains, and when we reached the top of one of them, a member of the team wanted to share that special moment with someone who wasn't on the expedition. He wanted to phone his girlfriend. So he took the satellite telephone and began dialing the number. I did try pointing out to him it was 9 a.m. where we were. That made it 5 a.m. in Britain, and everyone would be asleep. But as he said to me, "Paul, a promise is a promise." And the call went something like this. Hello? Hello, good morning? Yes, hi, good morning. Yes, it is early, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah, I'm sorry about that. No, I'm really sorry to have woken you up. Yeah. Anyway, can I speak to Helen, please? I've dialed the wrong number. People ask me what my favourite expedition photograph is. Is it of a summit? Is it of a vista? Well, it's neither of those things. It's this picture of 2 friends of mine at the end of the Pamirs expedition. It's my favourite photograph, not because it's particularly well composed, actually it's out of focus, but because it captures a moment of joy on the faces of 2 people after they've taken a risk together and as a result had a spellbinding experience. Now, I can't promise that if you take a risk, it's always going to end in smiles. 2 years after that expedition, I got the opportunity to go to the ancient Himalayan kingdom of Zanskar. Now in winter, there's only one way in and one way out of Zanskar, and that's by following a frozen river down a gorge that in places is deeper than even the Grand Canyon. It's a journey that takes about a week, and at night time you sleep in caves that line the side of the river. One morning, our Zanskari river guide explained to us as we were breaking camp for the day that it would be necessary to cross from one side of the river to the other. And as the team members filed out of camp, they dutifully followed in his footsteps. I was a little way behind the main party. If you speak to friends of mine, I'm often a little way behind everyone else. So by the time I got to the middle of the river, most of the team had gone round the next bend. As I got to the centre, I had a Tom and Jerry moment. And there was a loud crack, and the ice beneath my feet disappeared, and I plummeted into the river that was flowing beneath the ice. As soon as the shock of the cold and the wet had flooded through my clothes and taken hold of my body, I realised I had to get out of this water very quickly indeed. So I fought really hard, and I got half of my body out onto the next pan of ice. And I lay there like a beached whale, gathering my breath before I got out of the river. Just then there was a second crack, and the ice I was lying on split in half and dropped me back into the river again. Now at this point, I realised I didn't have the strength to get out again a second time. So I started looking around for other options. And I noticed that one member of the team, Seb, hadn't yet gone round the bend in the river. So I shouted out as loudly as I could. And luckily he came to a halt. And he cocked his head as, you know what it's like, you've heard your name but you're not sure. And then he turned around, which was great. But of course he's looking over my head because he's looking for someone 6 foot tall coming towards him. And then slowly, finally, his body and his head began to drop lower and lower until finally his eyes made contact with mine. And then he started shuffling along the river again, along the side of the river as fast as he could to get to me. And when he drew level, he did an incredibly brave thing. He crawled out onto that unstable ice and pulled me to safety. So sure, taking a risk definitely has its downsides. But you know, life has its downsides too. A year ago, this month, my Antarctic friend, Glenn Shaw, passed away. And on the anniversary of his death, I dug out an anonymous quote, which I came across many years ago, and I'd like to share that with you now. To laugh is to risk appearing the fool. To weep is to risk appearing sentimental. To reach out for another is to risk exposing your true self. To place your ideas, your dreams before the crowd is to risk their loss. To love is to risk not being loved in return. To live is to risk dying. To hope is to risk despair. To risk is to risk failure. But the risk must be taken, because the greatest hazard in life is to risk nothing. The person who risks nothing, does nothing, is nothing. He may avoid suffering, but he simply cannot learn, change, feel, grow, or live. Chained by his certitude, he is a slave. He has forfeited freedom. Only a person who risks is free. Thank you. Thank you very much. Remember the 2 children in London who are not allowed to ride their bikes that 1 mile from home to school? Well, in Zanskar there is no year-round school. Parents who want their children to go to school in the winter have to save up a lot of money, and make a lot of personal sacrifices in order to take their children to the boarding school in the city of Leh. Now that journey takes about a week to complete. And yes, of course, the parents do go with their children to the boarding school. But that's because their route to school, down the same frozen river that we journeyed along, now that really is a dangerous school run. Thank you very much.